So just a warning before we start, there's going to be a lot of pop psychology in this video, so if you don't like that sort of thing, you've been warned. So, A Song of Ice and Fire is interesting for a lot of reasons beyond just the story itself and the characters contained within. It's also interesting in kind of a psychological study of George R. R. Martin and the fan base. Because George R. R. Martin has always struck me as someone who's really at war with himself because on he's not really sure whether he wants to celebrate like European culture, the medieval era, that sort of thing, or to completely deconstruct and destroy it. And it goes very much back and forth because very often the tropes he does are inverted or deconstructed or mocked, but just as often they're played completely straight. And you often kind of get the impression he's not really sure where his actual opinion was. And as kind of with Tolkien, but to an even greater degree, the fan base kind of reflects this. And people have talked about this in the past, but nerdy stuff often has a very like hardcore right wing audience and then kind of a very hardcore atheist or left wing audience. And it doesn't always really appeal to kind of people in the middle of the two. And when it comes to A Song of Ice and Fire, you can really see this. There's such like a broad variety of opinions people take. You have people who like certain aspects, dislike certain aspects. You have people who read it as being patriarchal, as being feminist, as being a celebration of the medieval era, as being a deconstruction of the medieval era. You have all these like different varying opinions of it that are just kind of really fascinating. And I find more than just about any other series I can think of, how certain characters are viewed and what their overall reputation are, I think is largely kind of a reflection of the collective psychology of the fan base. So, what does this all have to do with Sansa Stark? Well, when I started reading the book series, Sansa was one of my favorite characters, and after the first book or so, she quickly became my favorite character. Generally speaking, I'd say in the books, my favorite characters were her, John, and Jamie as far as point of view characters go, but I also really like Barristan Selmy, although he's not exactly a main character. I know he's a POV, but he doesn't really get much POV. I also liked him, I liked Aegon a lot, and I liked Tywin. And Sansa always struck me as a very sweet, kind, and kind of gentle girl. And when I started kind of reading what the fandom thought about her and how they thought she was like a bitch and that she's evil and that she's like a horrible person, I never really got that impression. And I was kind of really surprised to hear that. And the show kind of was very divided on her. Most people tended to hate her until they kind of went into full on character assassination of her later on in the series. But I just found it very strange how negative the opinion of her was. Like, she was more hated, I found, than Cersei. She was more hated than Ramsay. She was, I'd say, at least in the book community, the most hated character. And I never got it because I really liked her. So here we're going to get into the pop psychology aspect of this, and I'm sure this will irritate people, but part of these videos are supposed to be done for fun. I was talking to a good friend of mine, and I asked him, why is it that I don't hate Stace? Sorry, why is it that I don't hate Sansa when everyone else does? And he just said, you're not an incel. That's why you don't hate her. Because Sansa is a Stacey. She's a massive Stacey. And incels just innately hate Stacys. Also, the kind of females who tend to like A Song of Ice and Fire are also the kind of people who hate Stacys. And part of it is it's kind of a projection exercise, and you have this a lot when you're dealing with Chads, is people kind of have to project onto Chads that they're evil and horrible and that they're all dicks because they're kind of dealing with their own inferiority complex. And I'm not going to say I'm immune from this. I'm just kind of making an observation. But that's something, the other term I guess they have, Vox Day came up with, and once again, this is kind of autism, but the whole gamma male thing. They're kind of aware that Stacys are out of their kind of price range, I guess you could say. And to try to justify it, and to try to justify the fact that a Stacey wouldn't be interested in them because of who they are and kind of their life situation, rather than just kind of accept that they have to come up with this narrative that they're bitches, they're stuck up, etc. So why do I say Sansa is a Stacy? Well, let's just take a look at her for a moment. A, she's a blue blood. That automatically is some points. B, she's absurdly gorgeous, and she has the classic Stacy features. She's tall, has a womanly body, red hair, blue eyes. Everyone just thinks Sansa is very beautiful. I find that she has a very kind of sweet personality. I think she's fairly intelligent. We haven't seen a ton of that, but she did manage to survive King's Landing. And she did manage to figure out kind of how to manipulate people in kind of a nice way, I guess you could say. But she did manage to survive, and she did manage to play the game well enough to get out. I'm not going by what they did in the show, because I think they just kind of ruined her character in the show. But you have that. And in general, she's just an exceedingly feminine character. She likes all the kind of traditional feminine things like music, embroidery, strong men, courtly love, all these kind of classic feminine things. And this kind of all comes together to make her a huge Stacy. So the kind of gamma males and incels who watch the show or read the books hate her for that reason, because they kind of see her, I guess, correctly as someone who's out of their reach. And to kind of justify this, if they kind of accepted that she was a decent person, once again, they would have to kind of accept their own personal flaws. And I'm not saying I'm not necessarily in this category, but I don't have the same sense of resentment. And then on the female side, if you look at a lot of female nerds, a lot of them are kind of total basket cases. Like, they're exceedingly overweight, they have daddy issues, they have disgusting dyed hair, they have tattoos, random piercings, all that kind of stuff. And once again, to kind of justify the fact that they lack kind of traditional feminine virtues, and men who aren't desperate are generally not going to be as interested in them. They also have to try to portray Stacys and just kind of girls like Sansa as being bitches or evil or shallow or something like that. So she doesn't really appeal to them either. She kind of, I guess, appeals to kind of more the normies, or I guess kind of more the conservative leaning side of the fandom. But to the majority of it, she's just kind of the exact opposite if they want. If we look at two of the more popular characters, Jon and Arya, the quirky offbeat girls see themselves as being like Arya. She's kind of the loner. She doesn't fit in, but she's a badass, and she's snarky, and she's smart, and she's a fighter. And even though this is in no way reflective of who they are, and Arya is much braver, much smarter, much more willing to get her hands dirty than they ever could be, that she's kind of their idealized version. And then Jon's also kind of the, I guess, kind of incel gamma male. I know this is all really bad pop psychology, but I just tried to have some fun here. Version of that, where, oh, he's this like guy who's kind of a loser, he's kind of awkward, he's kind of a loner, but he's actually good looking, and he's actually a good fighter, and he's actually pretty smart. And then like everybody kind of shits on him, but then he becomes like a Chad, and he has sex with like some hot redhead wildling girl, and then he becomes leader of the Night's Watch, and everybody just acknowledges him. And once again, this is all kind of comes back to George R. R. Martin's personality. And somebody, the friend I was talking to also said, if you think about it, A Song of Ice and Fire is like one big NTR fantasy. Like, oh, the waifu falls in love with like the most NTR thing is when Danny falls in love with Dario Naharis. Like, that's just a big fu to the reader. By the way, NTR is a type of pornography, particularly a type of hentai. It's short for Netrorar, or Never to Return, where like the main girl is in a relationship with some guy, and she leaves him to like go have sex with, or she gets like raped by some like ugly, brutish guy, and she falls in love with her rapist. And then she leaves the guy she was in a relationship with to go and live with the other guy. It's kind of a cuckold fantasy. I guess you could say. And Dario Naharis is kind of like that, because in the books, at least, he's absolutely hideous. So it's like Jorah in that case is like a George R. R. Martin insert, etc. Like if you look at who the other main, like most popular character is, there's Tyrion, who's once again kind of the gamma male fantasy of who they think they are, and he's very obviously kind of a self insert for Jar Jar Martin, because he's like short, but he's smarter than everyone, and he's surrounded by Chads, but all the Chads like are stupid, and he's a better person than them, and he gets all the girls in the end, and he's the guy everybody loves. It's very obviously, as I just said, a fantasy for a power fantasy for George R. R. Martin, which isn't a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with power fantasies. I like power fantasies myself. I'm just kind of trying to call a spade here. And so my whole point is you can kind of very much tell a lot about the psychology of the individuals and about the fandom as a whole, depending upon the psychology of the group and of the individuals. Like a lot of people like Cersei because they see her as a strong woman who uses who uses her body to get what she wants. She's a feminist icon. And people started to like Sansa in the show when she started to become a psycho and she kind of lost all the hallmarks of her character and became a completely different character. So those are kind of my thoughts on the matter. If you want to get angry at me for not going into as much detail as what a Stacey is, what a Chad is, pop psychology, saying stuff like gamma males, I guess you can post in the comments. It's just kind of a joke. Like there's some truth to it. It's Al Franken called it kidding on the square, where I'm joking, but I'm also serious, but just trying to have a bit of fun. Anyways, guys, as always, I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Argent, and I'll